Where? What? Who? Why? And when? This case goes down in the United Kingdom. Many of you may know the UK as the island which practically colonized many portions of the world, from the Caribbean islands to Indian provinces, and now with 14 territories under her belt, Great Britain is a nation indeed to be reckoned with. But besides from its legacy as a colonizing machine, the UK is recognized globally for its major tourist asset and business magnet of a city, namely London. The UK has a bustling population of nearly 67 million, with London the megacity attracting many visitors, inhabitants and immigrants. It is inevitable that certain bad apples enter the hubbub of a location. Unfortunately, this case highlights just the type of bad apples in the UK. It all really started way back in April 4, 2007. A little girl, April Jones, was born to parents Coral and Paul. She was a bright and happy little girl, who was the apple of her family's eye. It was discovered she had cerebral palsy when she was very young and required daily medication. But in spite of this, she lived her life to the absolute fullest, bringing joy to everyone she met. Her family said she ruled the roost with a cheeky nature, whilst also being kind and loving. She loved the outdoors and would often be out riding her bike with her friends. She was also a hard worker in school and was popular amongst her classmates and teachers. On September 30, 2012, April received a glowing report about how well she was progressing in primary school. Due to having such a fantastic school report the previous day, April was allowed to have some extra time to play outside. April was out playing with her friends near her home on one bright day. It was August 8th. At 7:20, a Land Rover seen driving away from Atlantis at speed. Just 9 minutes later, a frantic 999 quarters made. Agency. Hello, you think. What's the name of the child that goes missing? I put how old is she 5. The 999 dispatcher wasted no time by deploying police straight away, and within 8 minutes the first officer had arrived on scene. She spoke to a witness, April's 7-year-old friend, who she had been out with. She was able to provide a brief description. The man who had taken April had brown hair, a beard, blue or green eyes, and was wearing a green jacket or jumper, jeans and trainers. She also described the vehicle, and one thing immediately stood out to investigators. Her friend said that April had got into the driver's side door, meaning the car steering wheel must have been on the left-hand side of the car, where most cars in the United Kingdom will have the steering wheel on the right. Following this information, a critical incident was launched by the police. As it was an alleged abduction, the police needed to pursue as many lines of inquiry as possible to try and ascertain exactly where April was, knowing time was of the essence. That day had started like any other. April's older sister described it as being a normal day. April guns are swimming lesson as usual, and then skipped out of the changing rooms to head home. Despite it being October, the sun was out and it was a nice warm evening. April's older sister had gone to the youth club. But at around 7:30 p.m., she received a frantic phone call from her mother, screaming down the phone that April was gone. As the sun started to set, panic began to escalate. The response from the community was massive and immediate. As news started to spread on social media that April was missing, people began to come out of their homes to try and assist in any way they could and show support to the Jones family. But this made door-to-door inquiries for the police incredibly difficult, as so many words at their addresses and officers were only able to ask them questions once they returned. When her older sister arrived home from the youth club, she was hoping that April would be home by now. Instead, her distraught mother was out looking for her and police were combing the area. As the search efforts continued to mount, the media became aware that a 5-year-old girl had allegedly been abducted. The eyes of the country were fixated on the small little Welsh community, as it had been rocked by something so out of the ordinary. By 10:30 p.m., the police had put out an update saying they were increasingly concerned for April, and were appealing for any information that could help find her. Hundreds of local volunteers gathered to join in the search after the news started to spread on Twitter and Facebook. Also high on the priority for the police was helping to support her devastated family. Police revealed more information about the circumstances of April's disappearance, and said she was last seen wearing a purple coat and her school polo top. Refuse collection was suspended as workers joined in the hunt 2 hour by hour. More people came out to help with the search, culminating in more than 100 local residents. The town, with a population of just over 2,000, was inundated with volunteers, with some travelling from South Wales and the north of England. Police said they wanted to make sure that search volunteers were used in a coordinated and effective way. April's family weren't allowed to take part in the searches in case they came across something, so the local community stepped up to help. One problem the search teams immediately ran into was the terrain. The extensive countryside, mountains, gorges, streams, waterfalls and uneven ground makes it incredibly difficult place to search. There was slate mines in the area too, and all of these factors, mixed with the rain, presented a huge challenge for those trying to find April. An area of more than 60 square kilometers was searched and there were more than 300 specific search areas. The police knew that if April had been abducted by a stranger, every second was vital to try and find her safe and well. 8 hours on from the initial 999 call being made, the police and community was still out searching, trying to find April Jones. 120 search officers were out and searched through the night. The morning after she had gone missing, they decided to activate the Child Rescue Alert, which puts on notice or police forces up and down the United Kingdom to be on the lookout for any unusual sightings of individuals who fit the description of April Jones and the person who had allegedly abducted her. Information was being distributed to other forces, including descriptions of both April and the alleged abductor, as well as the car her friends saw her getting into. This was the first time the Child Rescue Alert had been triggered nationwide. Within minutes of April's disappearance. Okay people, let's go forward. The people of McNicholas had turned out in their hundreds to help in the search. Alongside professional volunteers, they carried on through the night. There's a large number of people here this morning, and we're very grateful indeed for all of your help and assistance, and into the following day. It had now been 14 hours since she had last been seen, and there was still no sighting of the missing 5-year-old. Missing posters started to go up around the area, and police began to set up roadblocks to stop vehicles. As the investigation continued escalating, the police force found themselves under mounting pressure from the media to release more information. Press conferences were being held every few hours, and sometimes journalists were given very little notice that they were about to take place. As the search continued, it was the task of Andy John, the detective superintendent, to try and find April's alleged abductor. After the friend of April had been allowed to rest, the police went back to try and get a more detailed description of exactly what she had seen. When April went missing, it became clear that April had got into the vehicle with the assistance of the person driving, but it wasn't clear whether or not she knew them. Due to April having cerebral palsy, she wouldn't have been able to get into the car unaided. During the morning of the 2nd of October, just one day after April had gone missing, the information continued to come through and it all started to point to one individual. A local man named Mark Bridger. He wasn't someone who was known to local police. They received information that Mark Bridger and his vehicle had been in the area around the time the abduction was thought to have taken place. What immediately caught their eye about his vehicle was that it was a left-hand drive, just like April's friend had described. There being information to suggest that Mark Bridger had actually been part of the search party that was out looking for April. More units were deployed and the police helicopter was also used to try and find him. They had also received information about full potential addresses where he could have been staying. Officers went to the properties simultaneously 20 hours after she had been reported missing, but could find no trace of April Jones or Mark Bridger. When they pulled up outside one of the properties, a cottage called Mount Pleasant, at 3:03 in the afternoon, there were no vehicles at the house. An investigator went inside and called out April's name. There was no response. Bridger had only moved into Mount Pleasant 5 weeks before. At 4:30 p.m., the police made an announcement. Mark Bridger had been arrested. Police gave details of the arrest, saying he was detained while walking his dog along the side of the road after being spotted by the police helicopter at 10:42, a couple of miles away from where April had lived. Not once did he lift his gaze to look up at the police helicopter that was circling above him. He had also attempted to alter his appearance by cutting his hair and shaving off his beard. It was about 30 minutes later the bridge was spotted by a patrol car. After confirming his name to the officer, Bridget turned and said, "I know what this is all about." The police constable asked him, "Where is she?" Richie replied, "It was an accident. A Christian with my car. I don't know where she is." He was immediately arrested. Officers described him as being an emotional wreck. Despite being told he didn't have to say anything, Bridget said he needed to talk. "I've been looking for her all night and today on foot, because my vehicle is in the garage. It is a left-hand drive Land Rover Discovery. I didn't abduct her. I did my best to revive her. I panicked. I didn't even know until this morning who she was until I saw the television. I just wish I knew what I had done to her. Where I put her. I want to say sorry to the family. There was no life in her. No response. No breath, no response in her eyes. She was just on the seats. I tried to revive her. I would not have dumped her. She is a human being." He was transferred to Aberystwyth Police Headquarters. The station was shut down to all of the prisoners to ensure that the teams could be properly housed there and focus completely on the investigation. Following his arrest, Coral made an emotional plea to the public for their help to try and find April. Alongside Detective Superintendent Dredge Bevan. She is. Find. Any news? English, I really 5 years old. Please please. Poop Facebook. PIC investigation, and I said earlier we're pursuing a number of lines of inquiry. And last feature is one of this. And in relation to the images that I circulated to you earlier today. Which was the Land Rover Discovery and Smart Pictures photographs. Coming again, ask. Did you see this vehicle? Between Monday evening Times Tuesday afternoon. And do you know Mark Bridger, and did you see him during that time period, when the evening and Tuesday afternoon? And if you have any information, please contact us on the Child Rescue Alert line. Police said the overnight search, involving 40 trained police officers, dog handlers and mountain rescue teams, yielded no news on April's whereabouts. They thanked the public for their efforts, but warned of the challenging conditions. Police reveal the operation had been unprecedented in the UK in terms of scale and terrain. Neighbouring forces and specialist teams were helping, with a focus on over 20 scenes around the area. The operation led to 600 messages from the public to the police searching for a couple of hours and then come back after 6 for daylight, ready to go again. And search involved 100 mountain rescue volunteers, 100 police specialist searches, as well as Coast Guards and the RNLI. I've got 2 people who don't have transport to take them with me. Meet you at this junction, please. I'm gonna tell the locals stop. I don't think the buildings stop anyway, because it's all such a close-knit community. We just need to find it. It was soon time for the police to start questioning their prime suspect, father of 6, Mark Bridger. Shortly after his interview began, he elaborated further about what he had said upon being arrested. He told the officer that April was dead. He said he had run her over, knocking her off her bike, causing her significant injuries. He said in a state of panic, he had put her into the car and then tried to administer CPR, which had failed. He then said he drove off with April in the vehicle. Bridget stated he then lost his memory and wasn't able to tell investigators where April now was. He claimed he was drunk and could not recall what he had done with April's body, but he was sure he had put her somewhere safe. The police made the decision to not release this information immediately, as they needed to verify exactly what was true and whether or not Mark Bridger was being completely honest. Now that My Bridge had been arrested, police and crime scene examiners were able to secure his home and conduct a thorough search of the premises to try and uncover any clues as to exactly what had happened to April. Upon going into his home, the stench of detergents and cleaning products was immediately apparent. And it was unusually hot, indicating there had been a roaring fire in the living room fireplace very recently. On the footage taken of Bridger by the police helicopter, a plume of smoke could be seen rising through the chimney from the fireplace of his home. But despite the best efforts of investigators, there was no sign of April either in the property or any of the surrounding areas. Andy John made the decision to meet with the family of April Jones on the evening of the 2nd of October to disclose the new information that had come to light. They were absolutely devastated by the news that their beloved April was now most likely never coming home. Throughout his interviews, when challenged with the evidence that had been gathered, he would be emotional and unpredictable. Officers believed these emotions were not genuine and pointed to him being both a fantasist and a liar. Mark Bridges' confession that she was now dead left those on the force devastated. They'd worked through the night, through increasingly difficult conditions, clinging on to any small chance that she might still be alive. April's older sister said that while the name Mark Bridge meant nothing to her, as soon as she saw his face on the news she recognized him. She often saw him out and about, and he used to live not far from them. As the investigation into the disappearance of April Jones moved into its 3rd day, the police still needed to prove that Mark Bridger had murdered her. The investigating officers needed to establish any contact he might have had with April during the abduction, and obtain any forensic evidence they could. When the police seized his vehicle, they could find no evidence of a road traffic collision and no evidence that the vehicle had struck anybody. Contrary to Bridges' accounts of April being seriously injured when he put her into the car, forensics could find no blood or traces of blood inside the vehicle. This solidified investigators' thoughts further. The Mark Bridges story of accidentally knocking her off her bike was nothing more than a calculated cover-up of a far more sinister turn of events. As the forensic examination of the car turned up nothing, they turned their attention back to the house where they believed April had been attacked. They were able to find traces of April's blood inside the home, indicating she had suffered significant injuries at the property. They removed what was left in the fire pit in the living room, and were able to find 17 fragments of her skull and 1 fragment in the bathroom plug hole, confirming the worst fears of everyone. Police did not believe that April's whole body was burned, but believe the fragments of bone got into the fire and bath during the cleanup. Searches of his house and laptop indicated that Bridger was a highly dangerous and predatory offender. This helped piece together why he had taken April to satisfy his sinister desires. His internet search history showed that he had an extremely unhealthy interest in children. He had computer folders filled with images of child sexual abuse, graphic depictions of rape and pictures of previous young murder victims, including Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, 210-year-old girls who were murdered in Soham, and 13-year-old Caroline Dickinson, who was raped and murdered in a French hostel during a school trip. More disturbingly, at 12:11 p.m., Mark Bridger had looked at a cartoon image from his collection of pictures, showing young girls being sexually abused. One show to go abound with gaffer tape being raped by an adult. When his vehicle was recovered later, there was a roll of gaffer tape on his dashboard. The police now had a much more complete picture of what they believed had happened to April. When he abducted her, he wasn't aware that another child had witnessed it. At 8:30 p.m. that night, his Land Rover was spotted arriving at his home in a village 3 miles from where April had lived. Police did not know if this was the first time he'd been home since abducting April, or if he'd driven there directly after abducting her, killed her there, and then went out again to dispose of her body. This sighting may have not been the first time he returned home that day. The next day, shortly before 9 a.m., Bridge was spotted close to a riverbank carrying a black bin bag. A witness would later tell police she thought there was something in the bag. Later, he took his Land Rover into the garage to be repaired and pretended to help look for April before being arrested soon after. Fast-track DNA testing established that April's blood had been found at Mount Pleasant, most significantly on the underside of the carpet, in the living room, and in front of the woodburner. Police believe he probably sexually assaulted April before brutally murdering her and dismembering her body, disposing of her at various locations, as Mark Bridger worked as a slaughterman in an abattoir. One theory was that he had used the skills he had gained there to dismember April's body after killing her. Bridge was due before the magistrates in Aberystwyth on the following Monday. The police said they remained focused and committed to finding April, adding that 10 specialist teams have been conducting a systematic and methodical search from daybreak on Saturday. Mount Bridge repaired in Aberystwyth Magistrates Court. A small crowd waited outside and one man threw a bottle at the van that transported him to court, while others shouted abuse. Bridge was later driven away to HMP Manchester, formerly known as Strangeways. There have been many expressions of hope over the last 7 days. This time they lit lanterns. It marked the point exactly a week ago when April was last seen playing on this estate. Since then, many emotions have been released. 6 months after April went missing, her family marked what would have been her 6th birthday by releasing pink balloons from the beginning God Green, where she used to play. On Monday the 14th of January 2013, it was time for Mark Bridger to enter his plea. He pled not guilty to abduction, murder and concealing, disposing of or destroying April's body. But it emerged that his case was that he was probably responsible for her death. April's parents saw Bridger in person for the first time since he had abducted their daughter Corinne, and Paul would go to every day of the trial determined to see this awful ordeal through to its conclusion. In March 2013, it was reported by the BBC that the search for April's body was set to end in the coming weeks. Although they hadn't recovered her body, the police and Crown Prosecution Service worked together to push on and prepare their case for trial. The trial was initially arranged for 2 months after the point of charge, giving officers and prosecutors an incredibly tight timeline to try and pull together all their arguments and evidence. When his trial began on April 29, Mark Bridger continued the same story he had tried to spin in his interviews. He was in denial about his actions and tried to present himself as a caring individual who had tried to help April after the tragic accident he was adamant had occurred. The testimony of April's friend, who had witnessed the abduction, was to be crucial in countering his story, She said that April had got into the front and then clambered into the back. It just drove off. I didn't know she was going to go in the van. The girl fiddled with her hair and sometimes hugged her bear, as she was questioned by Bridges barrister Brendan Kelly. QC. Kelly, who like all court officials was not wearing a wig or gown, asked if she had a good view of the Land Rover. Yes, I did, she replied. Are you sure that you saw April talking to the man? Yes, I'm sure, she answered. It also emerged the Bridger had taken his Land Rover to the garage at 9 a.m. the day after April disappeared, saying he had been in an accident. A member of staff told the court that while everybody locally had been upset about April's disappearance, they found it odd that he was so upset by it all, and that he looked on the verge of crying as he spoke about it. The mechanic said he kept asking how much his vehicle would cost to repair, and when he could have it back. He said he appeared nervous and edgy. Another person who would join the search for April traveled through the village where Bridget was living. She said she had seen him in a lay-by, carrying what looked like a black bin liner in his hand. The lay-by was close to the river and less than half a mile from his house, and the evidence just continued to mount. When he spoke to a postman about April, he feigned shock and asked what sort of vehicle the police were looking for. But he managed to contradict himself later, when he joined a search party at about 2 p.m. First telling one volunteer he had found out at 9:30 that morning, then telling another he had been searching throughout the night. April's head teacher provided an insight into the relationships he had formed when she gave evidence at his trial. She told the court how he had a history of relationships with young mothers and there were complex relationships between a number of these families. She had spoken to Bridger at a parents' evening just a couple of hours before he had taken April, but she had seen him talking to a former pupil now in secondary school, which she found strange. April's father also gave evidence, as he had known Bridges since the early 1990s, when the pair had dated sisters. He remembered Bridger as being a risk-taker who drove like a maniac. He spoke of how he had loaned Bridger a book on SAS survival skills, which he would not return, claiming to have lost it. Paul said he later found it during a visit to Bridges' house and took it back. As Bridges' behavior in the hours before April's abduction had become more predatory, the court heard how he had made an approach to a 10-year-old girl playing near to where April had last been seen. He invited her to a sleepover with his daughter, but no arrangements were finalized. During the police interviews, Bridger maintained that April had not been to his house, but when confronted in court by the overwhelming forensic evidence, he told the jury that images of her laying down in front of the fire had come to him in his dreams. After all the evidence had been presented, it was time for the jury to retire to consider their verdict. And on the 30th of May they had come to a conclusion. Mark Word, she was found unanimously guilty on all 3 counts. He was sentenced to life in prison with a whole life order. He looked down at the floor as his sentence was handed out and said nothing. Today her parents Paul and Coral watched in court as Mark Bridger was found guilty of abduction and murder. We only that Mark Bridger has today been found guilty of the murder of our beautiful daughter April. April be forever in our hearts, and we are so moved by the overwhelming support we have had from so many people from all over the world. Despite knowing he will never be a free man again. He has refused to disclose exactly what happened to April that night, or where her body is, and no more remains of April Jones have ever been found. Many believe that this is the last piece of control he is not willing to relinquish. At the conclusion of his trial, Mark Bridger was described as a pathological and glib liar. A asterisk 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 asterisk, who harbored sexual and morbid fantasies about young girls. He chose to put witnesses through the ordeal of giving evidence over a lengthy trial that had lasted 4.5 weeks. He could have avoided all of it by pleading guilty in the first instance to the charges that have been leveled against him. Detective Superintendent Andrew John, who had led the investigation, said Mark Bridger is an evil and manipulative individual who clearly likes to be in control. He has committed the most horrific of crimes, the abduction and murder of a young, vulnerable girl. He appears to be somebody who was a fantasist. In July 2013, it was reported by the BBC that Mark Bridger had been attacked while in prison. The 47-year-old was attacked with a makeshift blade as he walked along the gangway at Wakefield Prison in West Yorkshire. He was treated in hospital where he required stitches. His injuries were not life-threatening, and he was returned to prison the same day. In September 2013, the family had a burial funeral, with many turning up to pay their respects. As they didn't have a body, the family buried in empty caskets pulled on a horse-drawn carriage. But the burial site being the graveyard, just yards away from where she had disappeared. They were given ash and bone fragments from the police to bury. And the family also buried personal items alongside. This gave the family of sports they could visit to remember April and be together as a family. April's coffin made the 1-mile journey from the house to the church through the middle of town, passing pink ribbons along the route. Last October, the ribbons were the symbol of the search. Today they are a tribute to her, and hundreds of people who had joined that search joined the solemn procession, parents here holding their children close to many mourners to fit inside the church. In December 2013, the Judicial Office said that Mark Bridger had lodged an application for permission to appeal. But the following month they confirmed that he had abandoned his attempt just 11 days before the hearing was due to take place. In November 2018, leading search engine companies announced they were going to make it harder to find child abuse images online. As many as 100,000 search terms would now return no results that find illegal material. Following the horrors that had occurred at Mount Pleasant, the property was later demolished. April's family were there to watch the demolition. For the both of you, what did this house come to represent? Nigel, my daughter. 5-year-old life, just taken away. Nightmares ever since she was taken. Travis has knocked down. Today is just a relief for a system that isn't going to be overrun. Us is going to be breaking this for the rest. Finding sits on the vacuum mind. All the time like. Main Road is just there. We tried to pass on Main Road well every couple, 3 days like it's there. So there's no worries about it going past, and it's a relief. We probably can move on the little. Tragically, April's father Paul developed a rare brain disease. The family revealed in February 2018 that the diagnosis had left him unable to remember the murder. His wife, Coral, told the Mirror that Paul could not understand why April hadn't visited him in hospital. Her family are adamant that she will be remembered for the joy and happiness she brought to so many people, and not for the tragic way that she left this earth. It is for reasons such as these that we must look on to God. May God provide April's family peace and hope to reunite with the innocent child in heaven. May God show Bridger the sin and grief he has caused this family, and may we all learn to become better people. Kidnapping, murder, sexual assault. These are all the consequences of allowing pure malicious wickedness to grow and fester in one's heart. Wickedness that only comes from the devil himself. To force oneself on a young child and still receive twisted gratification. These are the real and sick fantasies more and more people possess, as the darkness of sin settles in their hearts and tempts them to do the undoable. Have you ever noticed how you feel when you start helping people? Once you start, it takes a while to stop. Right? Well, being bad is much more addictive. A sort of sinister addiction. Just like how songs with clearly bad meanings and lyrics are often quicker to think of than happy songs with a lighter mood. We as humans have a tendency to embrace being comfortable in the things we know are wrong. Whether it be the high feeling of scandalous affair, the rush of adrenaline when you step out of line, or simply disliking someone for no apparent reason, and not bothering to ask yourself why you feel this way. Simply, it is easier to fuel bad thoughts and desires than good desires. And it is more comfortable to stay in the loop of being bad than having to go out of your way to make the right choice. That is where God comes in. God and Jesus are one, and God is not looking for you to be perfect for Him to assist you on your walk into a better, more righteous person. In that case, it would not be a walk into righteousness, but an arrival into righteousness. Nobody is perfect and without sin, besides from Jesus. Yet, the one who was sinless came and died on the cross on our behalf. What was the nicest thing someone has done for you? In this lonely, strange world, where dark fantasies are lurking in even the most trusted of people's hearts, a nice thing such as a compliment, when you least expect it, can be just the thing to bring some joy into your day. Now to bring joy into your existence, and provide you with a constant state of appreciation and motivation, Jesus was nailed to the cross for you. How does that make you feel? Now how empty do you feel? How badly do you want to hurt someone, knowing someone was killed for you? For me. For the whole world. And not only did he die. He rose from the dead. A sign of hope. Of conquering death, which we all thought was final. He rose from the dead, just as we can rise from our dark and destructive thoughts, cycles and mentalities. We can do better. We can all do better. It will take more to be good than to be bad, but it is possible if you really want it to be. Here are some scriptures to get you going. Romans 4 verse 25. Jesus was given to die for our sins, and he was raised from the dead to make us right with God. 1 Peter 3 verse 18. For Christ also hath once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Spirit. 1 John 3 verse 16. Hereby perceive we the love of God, because he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. Romans 12 verse 21 states, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12 verses 17 to 20. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him, if he is thirsty, give him something to drink, for by so doing you will heap burning coals on his head.